Welcome to the Art of Conscious Living TV. My guest today is Vajra from Marin County. She has a center called Diamond Light Center. And it's all about massage and consciousness and awakening to the consciousness of living life. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about conscious dying, good death. And I'm very, very pleased to have Vajra in the studio today to talk about this and so much more. Welcome, Vajra.
Thank you so much, Victoria. To be here.
So how are you today?
I feel wonderful. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, let's start from the very beginning of your childhood. You had awakening at a very young age. And this awakening was that you saw through the conventionality about how everybody else was living. You saw that everybody was feeling separate from the divinity, but you have an incredible immersion with this divinity.
Yeah.
And you knew that there was no separation between you and divinity.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Yeah, well, ever since I was a kid, I never felt like I woke up in this little girl body and here I was playing the part of a little girl, but I always had the sense of that wasn't really who I was. I had a sense of who I actually am is something much vaster than that. And it was always puzzling to me that all the people around me seemed to believe the role they were playing in the movie. And then as I got into my teen years, as a child, it was a bit disconcerting because I didn't really have interest in doing a lot of the things that children do. But as I got older, and especially in my teenage years, I really, that started to really blossom in me, that sense of feeling my consciousness as continuous with everything that was, and realizing that I was this vast, infinite being in a human body, playing in human life, and that identity, that human identity, wasn't the totality of who I am.
And what was that experience like to know that you are knowing this and feeling this without question?
It was, yeah.
Also that the people around you were not connected to this same kind of understanding or same type of experience that you were having.
Yeah, I think without question is a really important part, that when I had that experience, it didn't feel like an experience, it felt like a knowing, it felt like a remembrance of something that, yes, of course, this is the truth, of course, this is something that I've always known, and it was just a matter of sort of picking up a knowing that I already had. And at the time it was magnificent and beautiful and blissful, but you know, as you said, it's also a bit disconcerting. Now I feel blessed to live in Marin County, where there are so many people that have a deep spiritual orientation and whose lives are oriented that way. But at that time, there wasn't a lot of that around.
Did you feel very alone, or did you feel?
Well, it's funny.
Did you feel strangeness to it, or was there just a total that you were okay with it, that you had some secret and most people did not know?
Yeah, more like, I couldn't say I feel alone, because it was really a sense of feeling that all of life was one thing. So in a sense you're alone because there's just one, but in a deeper sense there's an inseparable connection to everything. But I felt, I was young, so I felt confused of like, well, what do you do with a life? You know, what do you do? The idea of trying to accumulate things for myself or to become something didn't really make sense to me. So the confusion was more about, well, what do you do with this life that is so much geared toward what seems to me to be so much illusion?
And how has this shaped your life and helped you to have this deep inner connection at such an early age?
Well, I knew from that point on that was the only thing that mattered, that was the only thing that was real. And when I first had that experience, it was a very deep, powerful, overwhelming experience. But for a long time, it would come and go, that I'd have this knowing, and then I would get lost in my emotions, or get lost in my thoughts, or get lost in my human concerns, and it would go back and forth. And so the focus of my life became, you know, how do I maintain that sense of remembrance as I go through life? And then as the years went by, it just became less of a trying and more of a just remembering that truth is what's true, regardless of what might be going on in my mind or my emotions. So it affected my life in that was all I ever wanted to do with my life. And so I did a lot of spiritual practice, traveled in India, became a teacher, like that.
And what was your experience like in India as a seeker for awakening?
Oh God, that's such a big question. India is such a profoundly overwhelming place, and I think India really catalyzed a deep. There's a sense of letting go of. I think a lot of the primary illusion that I had, that we often have, and that even seeking spiritually, is that we can do something, we're going to attain something, we're going to get something. If I do all the right things, I'll be able to make something go the way I want it to go. And I think in India there was this deep sense of just letting go and realizing that that which is true is already true, and it didn't require me to do anything to make it true. And so,
well, they certainly have a different view on life and dying. And
yes.
the practice of dying.
Yeah.
Let's speak about that, of India versus America and Western thinking.
Yeah. Well, before I went to India, I was 28 years old, and I'd only ever seen one dead body in my life, and in the time I was in India, you see bodies every day, and I think the lack of seeing death in our culture perpetrates the illusion that we aren't going to die, which I think a lot of us, even though we intellectually know we're going to die, I have friends that are in their 90s and they still don't really get that they're going to die, and so much of the way that we live is based on the assumption that it doesn't have an end. And
well, you mentioned that you were in your 20s and you'd only had seen one dead body at that time. Many people have never seen a dead body, and they're much older.
Right.
So speak about that, about this dead body. Who was this? A family member? Was this a loss?
Actually, this is a little bit of a strange thing. It was I play flute. I play classical Indian flute, and some person got killed in San Francisco, and his parents didn't know any of his friends here, and so they invited us. He was a flute player. They invited us to play flute at his funeral. So I didn't know this man at all.
So it was an acquaintance.
It was someone I'd never met before while they were alive. But it was seeing the dead body was amazing, because it somehow, even though I intellectually knew I was going to die, seeing a dead body, I really got it viscerally, that yes, there's an end to this. Yes,
and that was your first dead body that you had ever seen?
Yes, at 28.
And what was that moment like of seeing a dead body? Did you feel comfortable? Did you feel uneasy? Did you...
I think it was
Did you
more,
want to not be there, or
no,
were you okay?
I was okay. I've always, and I think that's why I'm here today, there's been something about the subject of death and the subject of dying that to me catalyzes a really deep spiritual understanding. That because there's an aspect of us that dies, everything that we identify with in ordinary life dies, but what's left when all of that falls away? So I've always been who's to say what it'll be like when my own death comes, but I've always had a magnetism toward the topic because of the potency of spiritual awakening that it catalyzes for me.
So it would be fair to say that you are extremely comfortable at this point in time in your life with being with the presence of people who are in the process of dying and after they have died.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say extremely comfortable, but I'm comfortable with any discomfort that might arise. I mean, certainly the process is, it can be frightening, it can be dramatic, it can be intense, it can be painful, it can be uncomfortable, but I think I could say I'm comfortable with all the discomfort that it might
and what
bring.
would the discomforts be that would arise?
Well, I think it always hurt, like our friend Peter who died, and I was with him through a lot of that process. Watching someone you love in physical pain, watching someone that you love terrified, watching someone that you love in diapers, watching someone that you love losing everything that they identified with. I don't know that we could call that comfortable, but it's an inevitable part of life, and finding comfort in the discomfort that it might bring, to me, is a deeply spiritual process.
So as you were watching this process of dying and the uncomfortableness comes up to see how helpless this person is, does this bring up feelings in you, or do you adopt an attitude of just witnessing it?
I think it brings up many multidimensional feelings, and for me personally, I just can speak for myself, they're not separate, that there's one part of me that really recognizes the amazing beauty in it, like when the ordinary transitory aspects of a person start to fall away, the essence of their being starts to come forth, and there's an incredible beauty in that. And yet at the same time, when I recognize someone in pain, there's a fear that could arise, there could be sadness that could arise. I know that the person's dying, I'm going to miss them, I'm not going to see them anymore. And there's also reverence, that when somebody is close to their death, there's a palpable sense of the divine, for lack of a better word, of God, that is present. So fear, reverence, all of it, the whole spectrum arrives for me.
Well, let's speak about the two recent gentlemen that you have been with as they were making the transition. And that was your lover, David, and Peter Van Dyke. And this has all happened within the last 10 years.
Yeah, the last 4 years.
Okay, the last 4 years.
Yeah.
So tell me about that experience of being with David and the process of that.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience on so many different levels, and it brought up so much for me that I've continued to process over the last 3 years since he died. He had what we thought was a bad flu, perfectly healthy 58-year-old man with a bad flu. And then suddenly, over the course of a few days, discovered that it was stage 4 melanoma metastasized to his brain, and he didn't have much time to live. And so it really made me realize how, even though we know that death is coming and it's inevitable, it catches us off guard when it comes. And so, we went through the whole medical process, and I think because we're so unprepared for death, when we get a terminal diagnosis, it's so tempting to just turn ourselves over to the medical process. I think of it as sort of, there's a medical desperation that we're not ready to die, we weren't planning on dying, and so it catches us by surprise. So then there's the impulse to do everything possible to stay alive, no matter what that life looks like, and no matter how short it might be.
It seems to be the innate energy that wells up in people, even though they know that it's the end, and perhaps the doctors have said we cannot do anything for you further. The human body and the mind, it wants to live.
Right, and I think there's several reasons for that. Part of it, I think, is the medical profession, that very often patients are encouraged to do whatever you can to stay alive. Even our terminology is that, they lost their battle with cancer. Like, if you give up or if you die, you've lost. So there's a lot of support to fight, even if the treatment is only going to keep the person alive another few months, and it's going to be a miserable few months, there's still the encouragement to do that. And I think another part of it is because our culture supports us to have such strong identification with the part of ourselves that ends at death, with our bodies, what we do, our profession, what we've done in our lives, that when those things start to be taken away, we don't have a sense of ourselves other than that. And I think that's part of what makes the idea of dying so catastrophic. Whereas I think if there was a part of us that had practice resting in that which doesn't die, our consciousness, that maybe when the death of the body was closed, we wouldn't grasp onto it so desperately.
Well, I think this is very important, what you just said. I think this is the mainstay of all of it, that people really don't want to hold the reverence for the death, the sacredness of it.
Yeah.
The give it the attention that it so dearly deserves.
Right.
It's going to happen to all of us, so we need to bring that attention to it.
Right. So being close to these people that have died, when David was dying, very quickly, he was so physically beautiful, so mentally brilliant, so capable. He'd done so much good in his life. So many people recognized the contribution he made. But then suddenly, overnight, all that is gone. But he's still there. There's still a being there. And I could see a direct proportion to the extent that he and other people, the people around him, tried to hold on to who he had been last week. To that extent, there was just enormous suffering. But to the extent that we were able to just let go of all those things that were going and just be present with what was there in the moment, there was an incredible sense of love that arose, you know, that here we are. Because the fact that he was dying was really a concept in the mind about the future. The reality was he was alive, and without all the encumbrance of the transient identity, what was left was just the pure essence of who he was, and that was just, it just brought forward this immense love that I'd never experienced before in my life, just this real essential, just this moment, not trying to make anything different than the way it is, a celebration of life and love. And it's funny to say, because in a way it was a very sad time, because I knew soon David would be gone. But in another way, it was an amazingly rich time, because we were just so present, moment to moment, and so curious about what the next moment would bring, and grateful for whatever that moment brought, that there was a really deep beauty to it, that everybody around him felt.
Was David able to tap into this energy that you were holding?
I'm not sure.
And it gave him courage too. And it gave
I
him
hope so.
strength.
I hope so. You know, I was with him all the time during the process, and I think having somebody around that is not fighting the process, that is recognizing it as beautiful and sacred, and not some, you know, death isn't some terrible mistake. It's supposed to happen. It's programmed into the process of life. Every living thing dies, and I think if there's someone around that feels okay with the process, that's not fighting it, my hope is that that somehow, you know, transfers and makes it easier for the person who's dying to
and you
to
made
be
a very
comfortable with it.
special process of the cremation and the box that you created and the hand painting of the
Yeah,
box.
we really, I mean, it was really wonderful, because once we realized, okay, he's dying, okay, there's no medical intervention that's going to help, it really shifted from being a medical situation to a spiritual situation. And we, you know, we took out all of the medical supplies, and Peter helped me. We made these beautiful altars, and we just really made it a sacred environment with candles and sacred music playing, and just encouraging him to let go. And then we kept his body home for 3 days after he died, which was just an amazingly rich thing for us. I can't imagine, you know, when your loved one dies, if a bunch of strangers come and just take the body away right away. Like, for us to really sit there and meditate, and it really didn't feel like he had gone anywhere. It felt like he was still in the room, you know. And for a long time during those 3 days, it was just, there's no words. It was just such a rich, profound experience. And then, like you were saying, rather than spending thousands of dollars on a box that was going to get burned from the funeral home, we got a cardboard box and spray painted it white, and had all the people who love him draw on it, write poetry, you know, just make it really beautiful, you know, paste things that were just gorgeous. And then we put his body in that and covered it with flowers, and we ourselves carried it into our own van and drove him to the crematorium and sat there while the body burned and chanted, and just felt like a beautiful send-off, very, very powerful.
And this is something that is highly unusual, what you're speaking about.
I think so. I hope it'll become more usual, because it's it creates such a rich completion as well. And also having the body there for 3 days, right after he died, it just didn't feel any different than the minute before he died. In fact, I kept putting my finger under his nose to make sure he was really dead, that he wasn't still breathing. But 3 days later, you've got sort of a decaying hunk of meat that's starting to smell bad, and being there with that process, 3 days later, you realize this isn't my beloved anymore, you know, and I felt, and all of us who were there felt really ready for this body to go after 3 days. So I think it creates an incredible sense of completion, not to mention just the cost that most people incur, you know, with an ordinary funeral. It cost us $50 to get a box, and that was, you know, it didn't cost much more than that. So,
well, this way is making it personal and being in the experiential of the whole experience of all of it.
yeah,
And really opening up to your emotions and your feelings and your processing.
yeah,
Instead of having it distancing, that somebody picks up the
Right.
body and the funeral parlor
Exactly.
takes care of everything.
exactly.
And
yeah.
there's actually, what happens is there's not a moment for grieving to go on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they're buried and they're gone, and then years later there's this lingering of this emotion that the grieving process hasn't taken place.
Exactly. I think there's something so beautiful about being involved in the whole process. And it's just an incredible sense of intimacy. It's really the most intimate thing I've ever experienced, to really, to put somebody's body in the oven when they're done with it and have it burn.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this is not going to be for everybody, because people who are not living a conscious life with awareness, people who are not wanting to deal and take responsibility for themselves, they're not going to want to have any part of this, of what we're talking about.
Well, we had, when David died, Peter was very much a part of that experience. He actually, I have a picture of him putting the box into the van of David. So when Peter died, I thought, well, we should do the same thing for him. And even his community were very taken aback by the idea that, oh my God, to have the box there before he's gone, or to paint it, or to be part of that. A lot of people felt that was really strange.
All right, well, let's do a segue into David was your lover. Peter was a good friend of you and
of both mine and David and Peter.
David got sick, and then 3 years later, Peter got sick.
Well,
and Peter was, during the whole time that David was sick, Peter was there for David.
He was the main person who helped me take care of David.
Caregiver.
Really helped me, with everything. Like I said, diaper changing, laundry, day-to-day things. Peter was amazing during that time. And, ironically, he got sick with the exact same illness 3 years later. Yeah, the same. So all the places that Peter had come to with David and I to get treatment, I was then taking Peter to get the same treatments.
So one would think that this was preparing Peter.
Yeah,
he was going through it with David, and then years later he was going to go through it himself.
Yes.
And he had given this service to David, so now he was familiar with it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of looking at it. And, we can't help but make the association, hopefully it's preparing me for when my time comes as well. And that's why I think I feel it's such an incredible gift to be with someone through the dying process, because I think a lot of what happens in our culture, because many people don't see a dead body for their whole life, when our time comes, it's completely terrifying and unfamiliar. And for me to get my hope, who knows how I'll respond when I'm actually there, but my hope is that by being around it, and if people have the opportunity to be around it, it starts to prepare us, it starts to teach us, it starts to make it seem not as foreign and threatening. And my hope would be that when my time comes, it's like, oh, here's my death, I've been expecting you, and rather than the aversion and terror that we often have because it's so unexpected and unfamiliar.
So there would be a welcoming, and there would be an ease and a flow of it, as opposed to, as you say, a terror of it.
Yeah, and I think,
So it becomes a meaningful death,
right,
instead of just a terror.
Yeah, and an expected part of life, like when a child is being born. If it was unfamiliar and a woman didn't really know what was going on, it'd be terrifying, all the pain, blood, pain. But because we know that it's a part of life and it's the process that's necessary for a baby to get born, we celebrate it, even though when you're at a birth, often there's, it's not that different than a death. But it would be lovely, and our generation in the 60s changed a lot of the energy around birthing and made it more personal, more sacred, more beautiful. So my hope is to be part of our generation doing the same thing as we approach our death, so that when we get our terminal diagnosis or when our time comes, it's there's support, that people will say, okay, congratulations, you finished with your earthly life, now let's prepare for your passing out of this world, and that there'll be more alternative ways that are supportive of the naturalness and the sacredness and the reverence of the process.
I have a sense that our Western culture has a long way to go before we start embracing the death process.
Yeah.
From my experience and from what I've seen, people don't even want to talk about it.
Right.
And if somebody dies, they immediately say, no, don't talk about that.
Yeah.
Don't mention that to that person.
Yeah.
Their friends are saying that about
Yeah.
this other person.
Well,
And it's basically what's going on there is like, how will this process begin to open up in the Western world? What are the small steps that we
I
could
think
take?
what we're doing are the small, and just what you're saying, when both of my grandmothers died, they would not tell her that she was dying. Her children decided not to tell her that she had a terminal illness. And they didn't want me to come visit because they were afraid that I would tell her, because to me, I can't even imagine how lonely that is, because you know that you're dying. You have to somehow intuitively know that you're dying, but nobody will talk to you about it. I think that's just about the loneliest thing I could imagine. But I think the small steps that you're talking about is just what we're doing, you know, to realize that we have a choice, that we don't have to go the traditional route, and that if it's in our hearts to be able to stomach doing that, that we have that option, that when our loved ones die, that we can start to make different choices about how we go through that process, and to not have it be so secret. There's I remember seeing a movie some years ago about, you know, at-home funerals and people dying at home, and they had a lot of scenes where the dying person was, you know, in the house, and there's children running around and people just doing regular life, similar to how it is in India. And to me, that's a beautiful small step, that children see dead bodies, you know, that it's a natural thing. Okay, your grandparents died, and that, you know, they watch people who love them take care of them as they die, and they watch them being treated with reverence after they're dying. And then the next generation maybe doesn't grow up with so much fear and denial.
So to paraphrase, to start small conversations within your family unit, or in your relationship. It doesn't have to be a big dramatic conversation. Just have quiet, intimate conversations of curiosity about what death is. I love how you say that in the 60s there was a movement of conscious birthing. So where now is the time to talk about conscious dying?
Yeah, and there are groups around. You know, I know in Marin there's something called the Living Dying Project that helps people, you know, near the end of their life. In Hawaii, there's a group called Doorway into Light that does something similar. That does, you know, sort of what I did with David and Peter in a larger way. And I think people also just questioning, realizing that they have choices, that I felt very lucky. You know, most people don't realize that you can keep the person's body at home. You don't have to, people don't have to die in a hospital. It's not a medical condition. If you're terminal and there's no more medical treatment, you can be at home. You don't have to call 911 when a person stops breathing. You have the right to stay there with them and meditate and pray. And realizing a lot what our legal rights are around death, I think would make a big change as well. You can stay with your loved one after they die. And maybe if you just sit there for a few minutes, discover it's not as scary as maybe there was the fear it would be. To me, the day after, you know, like I said, I stayed with David for 3 days. The day after Peter died, we kept him home for 24 hours. And I just sat there and meditated all day. I didn't want to be anywhere else because the energy was magnificent. There's something, I don't know, very deep and palpable of the sacred that comes. So I think if people started to just be curious, just, you know, what's it like to be around a dead body? Maybe it's not as scary as I thought.
And another step would to be bringing in hospice care.
Yes.
And when you bring in hospice care, choose wisely.
Yeah.
Seek out that the person has got consciousness and awareness, and bringing in the spirituality and bringing in the sacredness of this conscious process of dying.
Yes, and hospice is wonderful. Hospice really is what makes it possible for people to die at home.
The distinction is that not all hospice care are going to be like that.
Yeah, we had hospice by the bay for both Peter and David, and they were. But even with hospice, I think it's also important to realize that the family, the loved ones, are in charge. You know, even hospice might want. You know, there were a couple of things that hospice wanted to do that didn't feel right, and that you can say no. We don't want that kind of sedation or medical care, or just, you know, really honoring. And I think also that's why these conversations are really important while the person's healthy, so that we have an idea of what does this person want, you know, because sometimes people haven't even spoken to anyone about it, and then at the point where they can't make any decisions themselves and nobody really knows what they want. So I think having those conversations when we're healthy is really important. So, you know, what do you want? What kind of medical intervention do you want? What kind of environment do you want? And really, you know, just saying, yes, we're going to die. It's not if you, it's when you die, you know, that it's, we spend so much time preparing for things like earthquake, being prepared for an earthquake that may or may not happen. This is definitely going to happen, and we don't spend any time preparing for it. So I think that's also, you know, to break the cultural taboo against admitting that we're going to die and just saying, yes, we are definitely going to die, and we don't know when. We all have this idea that we're going to die in our 90s, but a massive amount of people die, you know, unexpectedly, or die like Peter and David did, you know, just suddenly you're healthy and then you're terminally ill.
Well, let's use you as an experiment here. Let's say, imagine that this week that you were knowing that you were going to be dying, and it came suddenly, and you had time that you knew that you were going to be living.
Yeah.
Let's say you knew that you were going to be dying within the next week. What would you do?
That's wonderful. And I think that brings up such a great question, because that is a fantastic question that I'll answer in a second. But one of the things I also see is that we have the vantage point here, because sometimes a week is not really that much time, but if we realize in advance that a day is going to come when we have a week to live, we can start reprogramming our consciousness over the course of our lifetime. Because I hope that when my last week comes, I've done enough spiritual practice that I have the ability to start to withdraw my attention from my appearance, from my body, from the things I'm going to lose, and go inside deeply into meditation and be with the part of myself that is just pure consciousness, that will still remain up to the last second for sure, and who knows about beyond.
So essentially what you're saying is it's very important for preparation, and
Before.
that could be decades and
Yes,
decades
a
of
lifetime of preparation.
Yes.
And then to be, you know, to decide where I want to be at home, to have the people around me who have the, one of the things I saw with David and Peter was so important, especially with David. It was very disturbing for David to have people around him who wanted to talk about the past and how wonderful he had been in the past, because his brain tumors made it difficult for him to remember the past. And so what was really valuable to have around were people who didn't at all remember anything about who he was in the past, and were just with him right in this moment, just right now, who you are right now. This is what's real. This is what I love, who you are right now. And so I would want to be surrounded by people like that, people who understood that the part of me that was falling away was not the most important part of me, and that could be there just with what was remained up until the last second. People who had done that their own spiritual work, and also to be in a beautiful sacred environment with candles and music that, you know, we know how different types of music create different states of consciousness. So the right music, and you know, I think also the support, just like when a midwife is coaching you through your contractions, people saying the right things at the right time could help you let go rather than resist. One of the things I saw with Peter that was so interesting, that we really have a deep-seated belief that we need to breathe, right? That breathing is very important. So when it gets to the point where breath is not coming, it can be very terrifying. And I watched with Peter, when the breath wouldn't come, he'd start to get terrified and struggle. And the people around him were able to encourage him that this is okay, everything is fine. And when people around you are telling you it's okay that you can't breathe, it's a little hard to believe, because we really believe that breath is important. But when the people are around you are encouraging you that yes, you can let go, this is acceptable, what your mind might be telling you is completely unacceptable actually is okay. I think people coaching us in the right way, with the right energy, can really support us in letting go and saying, okay, I'm dying, I can't breathe, but it's okay, I'm going to be fine. Yeah.
So back to you dying in the next week.
Yeah, so I want those people around me, and again,
Yes.
that's something that, you know, you can't hire them at the last minute.
Right.
Those are relationships to cultivate throughout a lifetime, people who are doing their own spiritual work.
But on a personal level, what would it be like, now that you've done a lot of practice over the decades, you're in the part of acceptance,
Yeah.
would you what would the feeling be like? Would you want to be alone? Would you want?
I don't think I'd want to be alone. I don't know. You know, it's so hard to know. One of the things I've seen is what we think we're going to do and what we actually do can be very different. So my hope would be, I don't know that I'd want to be alone, but I think I'd want to be around people who can be in silence. You know, people who can meet me on the inner planes. I don't think I'd want a lot of interaction on the outer plane, which I saw with both Peter and David. You know, that to really start shifting the attention to the inner planes, to silence, to really letting go, acceptance, and I'd want to be around people who are also able to do that. I think it's, you know, we also, just like when we're babies, when we're dying, we need care. So there's much we can't do by ourselves. So that makes it a little hard to be alone.
And what else would you want? Would you want any physical attention? Would you want affection? Would you want to be?
Well, what I've noticed is it changes through the process, and sometimes it changes moment to moment. Just like if you've ever been at a birth, a woman in labor, sometimes she doesn't want anyone near her. Sometimes she wants massage. And what I've seen so far of the death process, it's similar. Like up to a certain point, love was very important to both David and Peter, to feel love. So that was a lot of embracing and holding and closeness. So I know you're asking me what I would want. I don't really know. You know, I think it's something that would change moment to moment. But from what I've seen, I think there's a certain amount of time that that kind of love and closeness is appropriate. Massage. There were these people that came for Peter and did this beautiful choir music, and that seemed to really help him let go. So, and then I think there's a time, a piece that you can only do on your own. So I think there's a time where I think it would be natural to want to leave everyone behind and just completely be inside and not be touched and not be disturbed.
Well, let me clarify, Vajra, what I'm trying to get at
yes,
here with you. I'm wanting you to imagine what it would be like for your process of dying, so we can set an example for others.
Okay.
And in doing so, as I hear you speak, you're saying that one would really not know. It's going to be transient from moment to moment and changing all the time.
Yeah.
And in that changing of that, what would you want, even though we know that nothing's going to be written in stone?
Yeah, I think somebody that would be attentive to my moment-to-moment needs as they change. I think that's really important, because often in a hospital you don't get that. You know, they have their protocol, and I think what I would want is to be someone not necessarily right on top of me, but close by and paying attention and making sure that that I did have what I need as that changed moment to moment, and making sure that I also had the privacy and the space that I needed moment to moment. One of the functions I really served for David that I would want someone to serve for me was as a gatekeeper, because as with everything in life, a lot of people had very strong opinions about what they thought should be happening for his death. And my job was in some ways to make sure that his wishes were the ones that got carried out rather than other people. So I would want that for myself, someone that was attending to what I wanted, and even if there were other people in the environment that had strong ideas to the contrary, that would make sure that my space was protected.
So essentially, they're supporting your process,
yes,
because this is your moment.
Yes,
this is not their moment.
Yes.
We want to make it that their death is our experience,
right?
But it's really their experience.
Yes.
The person who's dying.
Yes, and I think to really to own that as well, because I think as medical patients, very often a lot of people get used to just surrendering to whatever the doctor says you should do or whatever the experts say you should do. And I think that's a wonderful thing in death, to realize that the person driving, the person in charge, is the person who's dying. And I think a lot, to me, what is rich is having an attitude of curiosity, that to not necessarily have some, because one of the things that death teaches us more than anything is the fallacy of our idea that we're in control. You know, that when death comes, many things that we don't want to be happening are happening, regardless of the fact that we don't want them to be happening. So, so a lot to really approach with curiosity the whole process, realizing that I might not be able to make things go the way I want them to go, but I could be curious about the way I come to each moment as it's unfolding. And of course, things like, it's important to think about things like pain management. I would want to not be in pain. I would want people to be attending to me to make sure that I'm not in pain. And yet at the same time, I wouldn't, very often people are just knocked out completely because that's more comfortable for the caregivers, so to really pay attention to what I wanted moment to moment in terms of medication. And I think also for me, what would be the most important thing is the constant reminder of the divine essence of my being, the constant reminder that you're not this body, you're not this, this particular individual lifetime, that you're something far vaster, something far greater than that, and to rest in that. And I think actually to even have that kind of dialogue, like in the Tibetan culture, they have the Tibetan Book of the Dead that you read to somebody while they're dying to remind them of the essence of the truth of who they really are. Don't be attached to that body. That body wasn't who you are. And I think that kind of verbal and energetic reminder would be something I would love to have.
So your ideal process would be to be in the reverence and with your beloved, which is the divinity.
Yes.
And giving yourself over to that and inviting that and being with that.
Yeah.
And surrendering to that.
Yes, yes.
I guess that's a key word.
Yes.
A lot of surrendering.
Yes. And a lot,
yes.
A lot, something I say jokingly is that I hope to be at a place spiritually by the time I die that I'm so identified with the eternal aspect of my being that I barely notice. That the body can fall away, but it's not so much the focus of my attention.
Now, let's say that again, because that was so powerful.
My goal, as in my life, would be to as I go through my life, become so increasingly identified with the eternal aspect of my being that when the transient aspect of my being, my body, falls away, that I barely notice, because that's not the thing that is at the forefront of my attention, of my identity.
And is this a definition of what would be known as enlightenment?
Maybe. I mean, to my definition, I guess
it's
a lot of people
definition.
have, but to me that would be my definition, just complete remembering of myself as light, as the eternal.
And how do you know? What are the signs that you have gotten to that place?
Well, what's easier for me is to know when I'm not in that place, like when fear arises, when grasping arises, when trying to control things arise. I could see that I've fallen back into that place of separation.
Well, that's very interesting.
And when I'm
so instead of looking at the good signs of what is there, which
I would think the lack of those things.
You're looking at the lack of it,
I think
to show you, and that would be the signs.
Yeah, I think that
when fear
doesn't arise, when grasping doesn't arise, when there's this
grasping,
when that trying to control things falls away, when there's that sense of just resting in the presence of the infinite, just that resting in the presence of the infinite. And I think for me the goal is to increasingly rest in that increasingly more of the time, to the point where when death comes, my identity is with the infinite and not with that which is passing away. And I think that we also can support each other in that way, that when I'm sitting here with you, there's this beautiful form here, but there's also, I can see the eternal infinite within you. And I think the more we see and recognize that in each other, the more we support each other in maintaining that vast awareness of ourselves through the process of
identity. Getting back to India, when they have a greeting and they say namaste, and they're bowing with their hands folded, and what they're actually saying is, I see the energy and the life and the eternal love within you.
Yes.
And when you are in that place, I am in that place, and together we become one.
Yes, and we're one. Yes. Yeah, and I think that also, when we feel that sense of oneness, I think grief changes, and that not that we don't miss. I think when we get attached to a particular physical body and that physical body is taken away, there's grief that arises. But I think it's held in a different context when we're simultaneously feeling that namaste, that oneness with the person, that there's a part of them that is not gone.
As we're speaking, I'm thinking about a world that does not think about these things, like in worlds of atheists, or a world that people don't want to talk about God, or where spiritual things are replaced by the world of technical world.
Yeah.
We're moving into the
Yeah.
technical age of
Yeah.
information age. I can't imagine a world with only that. I think there has to be a balance of both.
Yeah, yeah.
And in the world that does not honor the innate wisdom of the spirit, what kind of world is this?
The world we see, you know, with a lot of suffering. I mean, I think it's, you know, I think without any judgment on good and bad, it just seems, my experience, and especially as we get older, and, you know, when we're younger and healthy, sometimes we imagine that we can control this world and, you know, just move toward the good things and avoid the bad things. But I think as we get older and, you know, things start to happen in the body, and especially as we approach death, we realize that that's not possible. And so what I see is the more we identify with that world, the world of things, the world of trying to control things, the world of the physical, and the more we are not in touch with the spiritual, the more we suffer. And the more we identify with the vastness of our being, and we identify with the eternal nature of our spirit, the more peace we have. So without any judgment or good or bad, I think it becomes that, I mean, for me, I'm just drawn towards that because when I move out of that, it's just too painful. And I think that's evidenced when we look at the world, that so many people who don't have a spiritual orientation or a spiritual focus, they're suffering enormously. And no matter what kind of strides we make in technology, no matter how much money we accumulate, no matter how much we try to make the physical world conform to our desires, if we look a little deeper, there might be a momentary sense of satisfaction when we achieve a desire, but within a very short amount of time, that satisfaction starts to dissolve and new desires start to arise.
Yes, and I do want to highlight that I'm not saying that it is a idea that we have to pacify, that we have to become religious, or there's a God energy there, that God's going to take care of us, so it pacifies us. What I'm really saying here is that, as I'm knowing from you, is that you are verifying it. You're authenticating it for yourself. You're making it real. It's your experience with the divinity is something that is an experience that you're having.
Yeah, and I think it's just a matter of having a curiosity of what is a person? What am I? You know, not even necessarily imposing particular beliefs, but when we start to question, is my experience of myself truly contained within the skin? I know mine isn't, you know. I look in the mirror and I see a body, that's how I know this, you know, but when I'm not looking in the mirror, I don't experience myself as a body. I don't experience myself as my house or my profession. I experience myself as something else, something that doesn't have words, that isn't contained in the mind's ability to describe things, but I have an experience of myself, and that's what I try to have curiosity about. Like, what am I? What is a person really? What is the truth of who I am? And when I start to really look at that honestly and objectively, I don't think, you know, if we really look at that, we really can't say, oh yes, I'm just this body, or yes, I am, you know, there's all these things that change, but there's a sense of I-ness that if I were to remember when I was a child, there's this same sense of I-ness, and if I project out into the moment before my death, everything is going to be different, except there's going to be this I-ness here that is me. And that's not a belief or a religion, and we don't even have to call it spiritual. It's just a sense of what is true about who I am.
If we were to give it the words that you are energy, it's a source, it's an energy.
Consciousness or awareness. That one thing I have that doesn't change is my consciousness, my awareness. You know, the objects of my awareness will change, but the actual awareness itself stays the same as here. And so if I start to think of, how can I be all these things that change? I used to have a 5-year-old body, and then I had a 20-year-old body, and now I have an older body. So how could that be who I am? Because it's always changing. But what doesn't change? That's more what. And so, you know, in a way, we think about spirituality or we think about religion, but to me it's more just very practical. Like, okay, what doesn't change? That has to be the deeper aspect of who I am.
So it's tapping into the unchangeable, the constant. And the constant is that beautiful awareness, that innate intelligence within oneself that is connected to this higher source of beingness.
That appears to me to be the totality. You know, that sense of I-ness is now, you know, where is the edge of my awareness? If I find an edge to my awareness, I could go further, and there's my awareness beyond that edge. So, you know, I think it gets very exciting when we start to really explore the vastness of who we are. And I think that is the remedy for the fear of death.
Vajra, we just have a few moments left, and I'd really like to ask you to share something that you're deeply passionate about in the way of conscious death and good death. Good death is euthanasia, which is meaning good death, no suffering.
I think that is what I'm passionate about, is the opportunity we have to use the experience of dying, our own dying, the known inevitability of our dying, to really start to open up spiritually, to really start to remember and realize the truth of who we really are as spiritual beings. And so my passion is to help people as much as possible and support other people who are helping people use the process of their dying or the dying of their loved ones to tap even more deeply into the truth of who we are spiritually.
And essentially, if you are accepting your death, then you are really accepting your life. It goes hand in hand. You'll be living your life much, much more fully and consciously as you're accepting this conscious death.
Exactly.
That is going to happen.
Yes.
It's not without question.
Without question, yes.
Well, it's been absolutely a pleasure and an honor to meet you.
Pleasure for me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yes. And from the art of conscious living, do take care of yourselves and take care of others.